basically have the same syntax like in JavaScript. And we have some minor exceptions. For example, in exception handling, we can define multiple catch clauses, each for every type of exception we want to handle, which I find quite a nice feature. And we have a different program structure. In JavaScript, we have one shared global scope. And if you want to have something private, we just need to define anonymous functions and put all the variables there. Dart apps are just libraries. And basically, each Dart file is a library with isolated scope. And in that scope, we can define classes, interfaces, variables, and functions. Here, for example, in the top-level scope, we can define variables, the top-level function, returning some type, interfaces, classes. Then we have a main function where we can put variables and functions. We cannot define classes and interfaces within the main function or any other function because classes are not first-class objects, so we cannot pass them as parameters to functions, for example. So basically, what about the scoping? In JavaScript, we could in one script define a variable and read it in the other script. In Dart, it's basically impossible. We get an error that the full variable is not defined. And if a library contains a main function, it becomes a script. And if we pass this file into the virtual machine, it will know where to start executing the code. So for example, this main IAM script. So how to use variables? For example, we have a file with some classes, and we want this file to use in other scripts. We just put a hash library with some name or description, doesn't matter what we put there. And in the files where we want to use this library, we just use the hash import and pass the Dart script file as parameter. And to avoid name collisions, of course, we can prefix all the classes from that library with some custom name. Like here, for example, I defined library shapes with basic rectangle class, implementing eye-shape interface. And then in the second script, I'm importing that library and instantiating the rectangle class. So let's talk about basics, variables. Yes, Dart has types, but they are optional. In Dart, types are just annotations. They are just for the developers, not for the virtual machine. Well, with one exception. Dart virtual machine runs in two modes, production mode and the checked mode. And when we run in checked mode, all the values will be checked against the annotations. And that's basically the only mode where the developers should work. The production mode is basically just for the end users. Basically, all the browsers will work by default in the production mode. So if we want to declare a variable, we can use, like in JavaScript, the var statement. Or we can use the type annotations, like Dart supports bool types, int, double, and also a generic num type, strings, and dynamic. Dynamic is so-called unknown type, so it's a default type for everything. And if we declare a function that's just a procedure, it doesn't return any value, we can mark it with the void keyword. And one more important thing, Dart doesn't have the undefined type. Basically, the null value is the undefined. So what is the default value when we declare a variable of the type int with the name number? It's null. Every variable will have the default value null. So we have to remember, the type annotations are only for developers and not for the virtual machine. What about variable scope? In JavaScript, we have function scope. Of course, in the JavaScript harmony, we'll get the block scope. In Dart, we have basically only the block scope. So this, the variable foo with the value 2 won't be visible outside the if statement. JavaScript has also a feature called variable hoisting. So we can, for example, read check if a variable exists before it is declared. In JavaScript, the first example will return undefined. In Dart, we'll just get an error. Also, in JavaScript, we can declare the same variable multiple times. In JavaScript, in Dart, we'll get an error that the variable already exists. What about arrays and object literals? In Dart, basically, we have the same syntax like in JavaScript, but there are some differences. For instance, the for-in loop. In JavaScript, the variable I will consist the indexes 0, 1 to 4. In Dart, variable I will contain the values. So okay, let's iterate over the object. How the code will behave? Well, it will throw an error. We cannot iterate through an object with the for-in loop. And why? Arrays in Dart are basically a subtype of the list collection. And the list collection implements an iterable interface. And object is an instance of map class, and this class doesn't implement the iterable interface. But both collections have the for each method, so we can use this one instead. Dart has also many more collections, like set, hash maps, hash sets, and so on. And by the way, there is no dot syntax for accessing the values stored in the objects. We have to use the bracket operator. And the dot access is reserved for getting the members of the class, for example, the length or the method clear. And if you want to mark a variable if you want to prevent changing value of a variable, we can mark it as final. What about functions? Basically, we don't have a function keyword or any other keyword. We just use a name, the brackets, optional parameters, and then the function's body, or functions or an expression, like the second code snippet here. We can also define anonymous functions by just using function expression. We can also nest functions and create closures, like in JavaScript. Function signature can also define our return type. Like here, for example, string for the function hello, and if the function doesn't return anything, like I said before, we can use the keyword void. Parameters can also have type annotations. Dart has special syntax for optional parameters. If we have a function that accepts optional parameters, we can put all the list of optional params in square brackets. We can also, like in C# or PHP, we can define a default value for the optional params. Here's a full example of the factorial function using tail recursion. Okay, so let's imagine we have a function that has multiple optional params. Like here, the range, I started with the to parameter, then the from, and the step. It basically creates a list from one number to another and jumping by this step number. So how do we call it? If you want to just pass the to parameter, we just call it with the value, for example, 10. So we get a list from 0 to 10. If you want to pass to and from params, we can just put the comma and the next param. But for example, if you want to call the function and skip the from param and use the step param, what can we do? Dart has a syntax for that called named parameters. So we can use a label, step, colon, and the value. And also, the optional parameters don't have to be passed in order. So for example, I can first pass the step parameter and then the from parameter. Dart is currently a technology preview. So it lacks many features. Like, for example, I miss from JavaScript the function call or function apply, maybe the arguments or variable, or the harmonic spread operator. But as I said, it's a technology preview. Dart developers are awaiting feedback, so anyone can create a ticket in the bug reporting system. Okay, JavaScript is prototype-based, or the object-oriented programming is prototype-based. In Dart, we have classes and interfaces. And as I said before, classes are not first-time objects. Therefore, we can define them in only the top-level scope. And we have two levels of privacy, public and private. But there's one huge difference. The private is not private within the class, it's private within the whole library. The explanation we can find in their bug reporting system, and that's basically, the explanation is that the developer of the library knows what he does. And it's very often needed to know the internal state of some objects. So they're allowed just to read private members of an object within the whole library. So here's a basic class. And on this code snippet, we can see one special syntax for constructors. Often it's the case that the parameters that we pass to the constructor are just assigned to some properties. So we have a quick syntax stating that the first param should be assigned to the width property and the second one to the height property, which I find also quite cool. Dart doesn't have method or constructor overloading. But it has a feature called multiple constructors or named constructors. So we have a generic rectangle constructor, but also defined here as S-square constructor, which basically accepts one parameter, which is size, and will create as a squared rectangle. And another cool feature is Dart allows us to overload operators. So for example, we have a class matrix. We can overload the multiplication operator and implement the multiplication by number or by another matrix. Also, JavaScript has a feature called automatic semicolon insertion. Both snippets show classical examples that will just return strange values or just throw an error. Well, in Dart, we have no automatic semicolon insertion, so if you forget a semicolon, we just get an error. But there is a very popular ticket in their bug reporting system, and people just want to have this feature included in Dart. I wouldn't like it, but that's my personal opinion. Okay, let's talk about basic types. In Dart, as I said before, we have two numerical types, doubles and integers. Doubles are, in fact, the same as the number type in JavaScript. Both use the same standard for representing floating point numbers. But integers are different. And they work similar to Python. They aren't restricted to any fixed range. So they just take as much memory as needed or as the implementation of the virtual machine allows. Strings basically are also the same as in JavaScript. They are just Unicode sequences of Unicode code points. But string literals have some cool features like multi-line strings. So if we start a string with triple quotes or triple apostrophes, we can then create a multi-line string. And we have a feature called string interpolation, which basically similar to PHP. We can use a dollar notation, and the variable p, for example, will be replaced by the value. Or we can put an expression, so the addition will be done here in this snippet. And this string interface defines only equality operators for strings, but not the greater than or less than. I hope they will include it sometimes, although we don't use this operator on strings that often. Falsy values. In JavaScript, we have, I think, 6 falsy values. In Dart, there's basically only one. But if we use the logical negation operator, all the values except Boolean true will give us true. Only Boolean true negated will give us false. So basically, in production mode, every value is falsy, except the true. But if we try to use the negation operator in checked mode, we'll just get an error, so we shouldn't just use this code. Equality. Like in JavaScript, in Dart we have the double equality and triple equality operator, but they work in a different way. The double equality doesn't do implicit conversions. So we won't end in such situations where empty array is equals to not an empty array, which is quite silly. So if we compare values of the same type, like booleans, we get true. But if we, for example, compare boolean to integer or string to number, we just get false. But still, we need to use is none to check if some variable is not a number. And that's basically a method on a variable. The triple equality checks just for identity, if both operands are basically the same object. But we shouldn't, or we will rarely use that operator. And basically, this operator is a fallback for the double equality when some class doesn't overload the equal operator. So it will just fall back to the triple equality. And using the triple equality, I found out that 0.0 is not equal to minus 0.0. So both are different instances. What about type of? There's no type of operator, but we have is operator, which I find personally better than the one in JavaScript. So we can check if a variable is bool, is double, is string, or is any of our custom classes. What about type conversion? If you want to convert a number to string or any variable to string, we use the toString method. Or we can use the string interpolation feature. If you want to do the other way around, from string to number, we can use parseInt or parseDouble. But there's one difference when compared to JavaScript. In JavaScript, when parseInt or parseDouble fail, they will return not a number. In Dart, we'll get exceptions. And if you want to convert double to int or int to double, we have to use toInt or toDouble methods. And a little mess that I found in Dart is in JavaScript, we have all mathematical functions hidden in the math object. In Dart, we have some methods in the Dart objects like sin, cos, or random. But for example, rounding methods, we have on the num, int, and double interfaces. It's logical, but the developers will have to get used to this. So there's a lot of critique about Dart. So what's the problem with Dart? Well, I think that there is no problem with Dart, because it's just a language. The problem is where Google sees it in use. In browsers? Well, cannot JavaScript really be fixed? I think it can, but it's just a slow process. It takes time, and the JavaScript inventors just try to be as much backward compatible as possible. And Dart just throws away everything and starts from scratch. So I have some quotes from for example, Brendan Eich. I guarantee you that Apple and Microsoft and Opera and Mozilla, but the first two are enough, will never embed Dart VM. And from Apple, adding an additional web-facing language doesn't seem beneficial to the project. If anything, it seems harmful. And the same guy also stated that he would rather include Python than Dart, because Python is a well-known language and many people just like it, and Dart is completely new. So the fact is, we shouldn't discard Dart as a language, because it has some strong sides. It's just a matter of finding an environment where Dart could live. Let's say no Dart, who knows? Okay, when I prepared for this conference, I wanted to have Chromium built on my notebook. And there are no precompiled binaries to download, so I just used the instructions from this URL. But the first sentences just show that they are supporting Snow Leopard with Xcode 3.2. In Lion, we have Xcode 4.2 by default. So after a few hours of fighting and Googling, I find out that that the 64-bit virtual machine doesn't have most features implemented yet. So I had to compile another one more time with the 32-bit flag. You have to prepare good few gigs of hard drive space for the huge SVN checkout and for the files created during the compilation process. And I also found out that the build script depend on GCC 4.2. And this version of GCC was removed from Xcode 4.2. It was still in 4.1. So in order to compile Chromium on Lion, we can either install the older version of Xcode, or we can configure, or we can make some changes to the configuration files. For example, in the include GP, basically I put the Mac SDK to version 10.6. And we have to remember that after every change of configuration files, we have to run either gclient run hooks or gclient sync. If the previous slide doesn't help, and the compilation still fails, just look for configurations _xcode GP and comment out the line showing the GCC version 4.2 and just enable the line with the Apple's compiler. And also remember to run the gclient sync or run hooks. Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions?
So is it possible to sort strings?
Again, please. Good question. I didn't check that. I think you have to do it on your own.
Everybody hears the question?
Okay, the question was if we can sort strings in Dart because we don't have the less than or greater than operator. Well, I don't know the answer, but I think we have to do it by hand. But I think Dart developers should add this feature sometime. As I said, it's just a technology preview, so it just takes time.
My second question. In JavaScript, not a number is a number. So type of not a number is still number. How it looks in Dart?
In Dart, not a number is double. But basically, it's due to this specification. I mean, the IEE 745. I don't remember the number now. So basically, it's a double.
More questions? Okay.
Have you actually built any application using Dart, and what's the feeling about building stuff in it?
I didn't build real applications. And in this presentation, I only focus on the core library. We have the custom DOM library, which is pretty cool. And with that one, I think we could easily build nice applications. Because the Dart's custom DOM library uses native collections that are available in Dart. So for example, in JavaScript, you don't know if a browser supports an event. And in Dart, you just put click, you have a collection click.add. So you know that if the collection click exists, you know that, that it supports the click event. So I think it has some advantages. Of course, we have, basically in Dart, we have two libraries for DOM manipulation. The one that is compatible with the DOM specification, and the custom one, which it's just a wrapper over the original specification. But as I said, I didn't build any commercial or any bigger application in Dart, just experimenting.
There are like 3 demos from Google with some a little complicated applications, and I heard that somebody ported Box2D to Dart, so it's like
Box2D was, and it will be. It's now just ported, but in the future it will be the perfect example to show how to code Dart. They will just make it prettier.
A slightly less technical, but more a political question. The Dart language was originally hyped as the replacement for JavaScript, but I heard voices that this is just a cover-up for Dart being a replacement for Java on Android. How do you feel about it?
The truth is always in the middle. It really might be that Google wants to have a backup when they lose when they lose the case against Oracle. It might be that they will replace Java on Android. I don't know that. And I don't know how they want to really, how they see Dart living in browsers together with JavaScript, for example. Because it will just break the web. And for example, they always say that Dart can be compiled to JavaScript. Okay, it can be, but it won't never be so efficient. And the current state of the compiler isn't exactly the same as the normal virtual machine. There are some huge differences in basic stuff like some usage of some operators. So, okay. Hello. So there's a lot of work in front of the Dart team to make it compatible with the virtual machine, the Dart compiler.
Okay, far one. I will try to throw.
Is there any reverse compiler for Dart? So convert JavaScript to Dart, like for CoffeeScript, there is some reverse compiler that you can convert JavaScript to CoffeeScript?
I don't know. Didn't find such thing.
Probably not, but they are trying like that. It's like porting JavaScript to Dart. They're trying to make it as easy as possible. So there are some few articles about porting JavaScript to Dart in easy way, but it's like only preview, so sometime. Sorry, I will add some news from myself.